Welcome to Dream Team TV.
Hi, this is Dean Hartman.
And I'm Steve Harney.
We're here on Dream Team TV to discuss a new topic with real estate expert and Inman News Top 100 real estate experts, Steve Harney, about why sellers need to be aggressive today if they want to get their home sold. So Steve, give us a little bit of a background about why now is the time for sellers to be aggressive.
Well, pricing is going to be the issue for some time yet. And we are seeing a tremendous increase in demand right now. The buyers are back out there. It looks like people are getting comfortable in the market again. And one of my fears is that as people start seeing buyers enter into the market, that they're going to think that prices are going to start appreciating pretty rapidly again. And what we have to realize, it's not called a demand curve. It's not just based just on demand. It's supply and demand. And one of the things I like to use, an example I like to use on that, if I owned a store in town and I was selling pencils, and I had 100 pencils for sale, and there were 5 other stores in town, and they each had 100 pencils, together we would have 600 pencils for sale. Right. If we all decided we wanted to sell them for $1, we'd say, all right, fine, well, let's sell our pencils. If there were only 3 people in the town that still used the pencil, and they all decided they wanted to pay a quarter and not a penny more than a quarter, if we wanted to sell our pencils, we'd have to sell them for a quarter.
Right.
Now, if buyers doubled and we had 6 buyers, that doesn't mean we can raise our price because we still have 600 pencils between us to sell. If buyers quadrupled and we now had 24 buyers, how much will we sell our pencils for now?
Still a quarter.
Still a quarter.
Right.
Because there's 600 of them. So I think that sellers have to realize that even though demand is picking up, supply to the market is also increasing pretty dramatically.
So you talk about demand, it's more buyers who are finally realizing that there are huge advantages to home ownership, and with interest rates where they are, there's a little bit of a misconception on the buyer side that there's no financing available for buyers today. And, you know, for those of us in the mortgage business, we find that kind of laughable. You know, we're closing loans every day because there is mortgage money available. You know, the guidelines have tightened a little bit. The standards are there that we really only lend money to people who actually can afford to pay us back. You know, it's a little bit different than it was a few years ago. But there is plenty of mortgage money available for buyers. So that word is slowly getting out to the buyers, and they see that prices have come down and rates are very accommodating. So buyers are back out there, but there's still not enough buyers to eat up the inventory that's available today.
Mm-hmm. And the inventory coming to market.
Right. So maybe talk a little bit about all that inventory that isn't yet on the market and how that's going to affect pricing.
This year's going to be a pretty interesting year as we go through it because the biggest challenge that entered into the real estate business is there were many people, as you mentioned before, that took mortgages they couldn't afford to pay back.
Right.
Then there were a lot of people that, you know, took good mortgages and were able to do it. And, you know, when they took that payment, it was reasonable, but the economy kicked them in the stomach, and, you know, it's hurt a lot of families. Because of that, there's more and more properties that the banks have had to repossess and own. Their biggest challenge was, well, how do we bring them back into the market? Mm-hmm. If they did it too quickly, it would crush pricing. If they let it go too slowly, we'd never reach a recovery because there'd always be this overhang. So I like to look at the foreclosure situation as, you know, water behind the dam. And the real estate industry is the valley on the other side of that dam. The banks had to try to figure out how much water could they release from the dam to keep the river in the valley flowing without flooding the houses in the valley. Mm-hmm. And they worked through 2010 on that, last year on that. And by the middle of the year, the third quarter of last year, they finally came up with that number. They figured out, all right, this is what we can release to the market that will have some bearing on price but won't crush pricing. And that's when we saw them start to really ratchet up the repossessions. August was 47% greater than the August before. And September was the largest month. They repossessed over 100,000 homes just in the month of September. And they were filling that water behind the dam because they felt pretty good that they knew how much they could release from the dam. Mm-hmm. Then a couple of things happened. They got a little sloppy with the paperwork, and they had to redo a lot of that paperwork. And that stopped or slowed up dramatically the amount of water they could release from the dam,
Right.
Because there was interventions there. I like to say there was a cork placed in the dam. And going forward now, that cork is loosening and loosening and loosening. And while that's loosening, there's more and more of that foreclosed property entering into the valley. I don't think that there will be so much that it will flood the valley, but there might be a few basements flooded. They have to let it go. And when that's happening, that increase in supply, I think, will overshoot the increase in demand. And as long as you're pricing anything, the ratio between supply and demand will determine pricing. So I think they'll continue to be those 600 pencils, even though there are more buyers.
You have any concern that there's going to be 800 pencils?
Some, but again, I think there's a lot of water behind the dam, and they're going to have to make a decision whether they're going to release that water very quickly. I will tell you that an interesting stat is that the Bank of America, Fannie Mae, and Wells Fargo have all talked about the fact that by mid-year, going into the second and third quarter of 2011, they think prices are going to fall pretty dramatically and then start coming up from there. So if they're predicting that prices will get hit their hardest in the second and third quarters of 2011, the other thing they have in common, those three entities, is they have a hand on the cork.
Right.
So I think they might be telling us something that's when that inventory will be released. And do I think there'll be a little extra at the beginning to make up for the cork being stuck in the dam for several months?
Right.
Yeah, I do think that there'll be some at the beginning.
So how does that affect the seller who's not a bank that's trying to get rid of its inventory, but just a regular person who wants to sell their home?
Well, anyone selling their home has to realize that they have a lot of competition. They know that already. The difference between the type of competition we're talking about moving forward and the competition they're facing mostly now is as the banks go through the process of releasing properties, we have to realize that a foreclosed property sells nationally at a 41% discount. And even if they don't foreclose on all those people falling behind, and I think this is going to happen, there'll be more and more short sales. A short sale nationally sells at a 19% discount. So now let's take a look at whatever you're selling. If you know there's an increased supply of discounted property.
So it's not just the number of units, it's the fact that they're available for less money.
They're available for less money. So now as a buyer, there are going to be certain buyers that want to take that 19% discount. There are certain buyers that are going to want to take that 41% discount and not buy the house that doesn't have those challenges. They're willing to take on the challenges of a short sale or a foreclosure, and there are challenges to purchasing those properties. They're willing to take those challenges on for the savings.
So your advice to a regular seller would be hurry up.
If my family, if my pop was selling his house today, I would tell him there's a window of opportunity before that cork blows, and that window of opportunity is probably the next 90 to 120 days, and mid-year, somewhere around mid-year. And after that, prices will be low. He'd probably have to wait another year after that, 18 months from today, before he starts seeing appreciation again. Because what we have to realize when prices fall, it's not like the old days of the Super Bowl when I was growing up that this real little magic ball, you could bounce against the floor and it hit off the ceiling. Prices will go down and take time to come back.
Right.
They won't come back the next day. So if my pop was selling his house, I would say, Dad, sell now. The most money you're going to get for the house is right now or 18 months from now.
So when you combine supply and demand, the increasing supply and a moderately increasing demand, you see prices tumbling. Factor in also the belief that interest rates are going to start to climb a little bit, that the Fed needs to start raising rates to force us not to deflate the economy, but to encourage borrowing and people to move. Is that two components really make it so that an 8 to 10% predicted drop in the first half of the year from a Wells or a Fannie is something you believe is also likely? Or
I think that we're going to see somewhere in most parts of the country. Now, every part of the country is a little bit different, but in most parts of the country, I think we're going to see between a 5 and 8% drop. I think that those numbers are legitimate. And that 5 to 8% drop that we're going to see, if you have a house for $300,000, that's 15 to whatever is $24,000 you're losing.
Right.
So if my pop was selling his house, I wouldn't want him to lose that $20-something thousand. I'd want him to sell now instead. No, I think that the uptick in interest rates, and it's not that that's about to happen, as we both know, that's all in the process of happening. I think that short term, that's driving some demand to the market because they're seeing that, well,
buyers are hurrying up.
Yeah, hurrying up. And we at one point there it looked like interest rates were dropping into a bottomless pit. Now we've definitely found the floor, and it's bouncing off the floor. So I think that short term that's brought a lot of buyers. But as you've been very good to explain, long term what that really does is increase interest rate. It doesn't allow the buyer to pay as much for the house because they can't qualify for that amount. So long term, I still think that'll have some downward pressure on pricing.
Before we jump the inventory thing, I've seen you talk many times, and we're friends, where you talk about months of available inventory in a market and how that is a precursor, a predictor of where home values are going to go. So in many markets, at least locally, we're looking at 12 to 15 months worth of available inventory. With all this short sale, foreclosure, REO properties coming, I've seen some estimates where there's 100 months worth of inventory. How does anybody really believe that in the second half of the year we're going to hit the bottom and not continue to tumble?
Well, month supply of inventory on visible inventory, the inventory that's currently on the market, in a stabilized market, there should be between 5 and 6 months.
Okay.
In 2006, 2007, when prices were going through the roof, there were many markets where it was only 2 to 3 months inventory. So there weren't enough houses for the amount of buyers that wanted to buy them. That's what drove prices up. 5 to 6 months is normalized, meaning that prices will go up a little bit better than inflation. That's been historic averages. Once you're north of 6 months, greater than 6 months inventory, then you're going to have depreciation. There's too many houses for the amount of buyers that want to buy. So right now in most markets, like you mentioned, in many price points, we do have an excess of that 7 months inventory, so prices will depreciate. Hanging over us is that month supply that you just mentioned, the shadow inventory that the banks are holding and people that are 90 days behind in a mortgage that will turn into either a short sale or foreclosure. That's not mathematically the same as having 10 months because they're not going to release it all at one time.
Okay.
All right, so there is in some parts of the country, down in Texas, that might only be 8 or 9 months shadow inventory. Here, on the island, that number is 30 months shadow inventory. But that doesn't mean you add that to the current.
Okay.
Because what they're going to do, what that really means is how long is it going to be before we clear it?
How do we let the water out of the dam?
Right. So if there's, let's say, in a community 24 months shadow inventory, they might release 2 months worth of inventory each month.
Okay.
So now instead of being, if your marketplace is 9 months inventory, visible inventory currently in the market, it's really going to be 11 because they're going to start releasing some of that discounted distressed properties.
All right. Let me just go for one last point as we wrap up. It sounds terrible if you're a home seller right now. Talk to me about the opportunity of selling now and add that to the fact that most sellers become buyers. So they're losing on one hand but gaining on the other hand.
Well, if in the marketplace you have a $200,000 house and you're thinking about buying a $300,000 house, just as an example, if both houses lost 20%, you're right. You feel bad because you just lost $40,000 on your house. But the house you're moving up to, if it went down that same 20%, lost $60,000.
Right.
So you lost 40 on the house you were selling. You saved 60 on the house you're buying. You're $20,000 ahead.
Plus, you probably have a lower interest rate on your purchase.
And the current interest rates, that's it. And that's why right now the people who are really driving the market are investors and very wealthy buyers. They understand that principle.
Right.
They understand, let's sell whatever we have now at the best price we can and move up. Because down the road, what we move up to, when the prices turn, and they will appreciate at a greater number, dollar-wise. And we have a much lower interest rate.
So, just really wrapping up, it's a good time to buy a home, and it's a good time to move up. The only person who's really damaged at this point for the whole thing is somebody who is selling their last house because they've lost that equity over the last few years and they're not gaining any benefit. But for a majority of homeowners today, it is a very good time to get on with your life, close this chapter, and move on to the future.
What we can allow real estate to be is purely financial, because you're selling your house not just for the finances. You're selling the house to get on with your life, as you just mentioned. Whether it's to be with family down south, because that's where the rest of your family is, whether it's to move to a different part of the country for health reasons. You shouldn't let dollars get in the way of your life. As a matter of fact, we laugh at people or don't think as highly of people that allow money to control their lives. There are a lot of things that are more important than money. But somehow in the sale of a house, money seems to just take over all reason. And moving on with your life, like you just put it, is really the most important thing.
You got to put your ego aside and make the best decision.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it.
We'll see you next week.